After his settlement there, he gave Mr. Sylvester, whom he peculiarly valued, and had a special intimacy with, and his flock, his pains gratis, every Lord's Day in the morning, and every other Thursday morning at a weekly lecture. And thus he continued for about 4 years and a half, rejoicing as much as any man at the happy revolution under the conduct of King William, though he appeared not much in public. And when he was quite disabled from public service by his growing weakness, he still continued to do good in his own hired house, where he opened his doors morning and evening every day to all that would come to join with him in family worship, reading and expounding the scriptures with great seriousness and freedom. At length his distempers took him off from this also, and confined him first to his chamber and then to his bed. Under sharp pains he was very submissive to the will of God, and when he was inclined to pray most earnestly for a release, he would check himself and say, "It is not fit for me to prescribe, Lord, when thou wilt, what thou wilt, how thou wilt." At his end, as his end drew near, being often asked by his friends how it was with his inward man, he replied, "I bless God, I have a well-grounded assurance of my eternal happiness and great peace and comfort within." He gave excellent counsel to young ministers that visited him, earnestly prayed to God to bless their labors, and expressed great hopes that God would do a great deal of good by them, and great joy that they were of moderate and peaceable spirits. Being at last asked how he did, his answer was, "Almost well," and at length he expired, December the 8th, 1691, and was a few days after interred in Christ Church in London, whither his corpse was attended by a numerous company of persons of different ranks, and especially of ministers, some of them conformists, who paid him the last office of respect. There were 2 discourses made upon occasion of his funeral, one by Dr. Bates and the other by Mr. Sylvester, which are both in print. The former may be met with in the doctor's works, and the latter at the end of Mr. Baxter's life in folio. His last will and testament bore date July the 7th, 1689. The preamble was something peculiar and ran thus: "I, Richard Baxter, of London, clerk and unworthy servant of Jesus Christ, drawing to the end of this transitory life, having through God's great mercy the free use of my understanding, do make this my last will and testament, revoking all other wills formerly made by me. My spirit I commit, with trust and hope of the heavenly felicity, into the hands of Jesus, my glorified Redeemer and Intercessor, and by his mediation into the hands of God, my reconciled Father, the infinite, eternal Spirit, light, life, and love, most great and wise and good, the God of nature, grace, and glory, of whom and through whom and to whom are all things, my absolute owner, ruler and benefactor, whose I am, and whom I, though imperfectly, serve, seek, and trust, to whom be glory forever. Amen. To him I render most humble thanks, that he hath filled up my life with abundant mercy, and pardoned my sin by the merits of Christ, and vouchsafed by his Spirit to renew me and seal me as his own, and to moderate and bless to me my long sufferings in the flesh, and at last to sweeten them by his own interest and comforting approbation, who taketh the cause of love and concord as his own, etc. He ordered his books to be distributed by Mr. Matthew Sylvester and Mr. Roger Morris among poor scholars, which was done accordingly. All that remained of his temporal estate, after a few legacies to his kindred, he disposed of for the benefit of the souls and bodies of the poor. And he left Sir Henry Ashurst, Baronet, Rowland Hunt of Boration, Esquire Mr. Thomas Hunt, merchant, Edward Harley, Esquire Mr. Thomas Cookie, merchant, Mr. Thomas Trench, merchant, and Mr. Robert Bird, gentleman, his executors. Few ever had more weakness to embitter their lives than he, and yet this heightened and cherished the peculiar seriousness of his spirit. Few ever were more strongly tempted to infidelity, and yet, as Providence overruled it, that contributed in the issue to his greater establishment. He was tempted sorely to question the truth of the Scriptures, the immortality of the soul, and the life to come. This sort of temptations did not assault him in that way that is usual with melancholy persons, but with a show of sober reason. Hereupon he was forced to dig to the very foundations of religion, and seriously to examine the reasons of Christianity, and to give a hearing to all that could be said against it, and his preaching and writings were upon this account the more useful. And he at last found that nothing is so firmly believed as that which had been sometime doubted of. He was a great observer of Providence, and in the course of his life met with many surprising deliverances. When he was 17 years of age, riding on an unruly horse, who would often get the bit in his teeth and run away with his rider, he was run away with in a very dangerous place. He was in a field on high ground, where there was a quick-set hedge on the side of him that was the only fence, on the other side of which was a deep narrow lane, about a story's height below him. When the horse was running away with him, he turned aside on a sudden, and leaped over the hedge into the lane. He came to the ground before the horse, and yet received no hurt, though it seemed marvelous how his feet could fall besides him. At another time, being about the same age, and at Ludlow Castle, in company of several idle gentlemen, he was learning to play at tables of the best gamester in the house, when his opposite had won so much the better that it was 100 to 1, besides the difference of their skill. He still held on, though both he and the standers-by laughed at him for not giving up, and told him the game was lost. He was so confident of it as to offer 100 to 1, and actually did lay down 10 shillings to 6 pence. When the wager was laid, he told him there was no possibility of the game but by one cast often, and it so fell out that he had that same cast for several times successively, so that by that time a man could go 4 or 5 times about the room, his game was gone, which caused great admiration. He took the hint, feared that the devil had the ruling of the dice, and did it to entice him to be a gamester, and so gave him his 10 shillings again, and resolved never more to play at tables whilst he lived. At another time, travelling from London into the country, about Christmas in a very deep snow, he met on the road a loaded wagon, where he could not pass by, but on the side of a bank, passing over which all his horse's feet slipped from under him, and all the girths broke, so that he was cast just before the wagon wheel, which had gone over him, but that it pleased God the horses suddenly stopped, without any discernible cause, till he got out of the way. Often was he brought very low while he was at Kidderminster, so as to receive the sentence of death in himself, when his poor honest praying neighbours there met together, and upon their fasting and earnest prayers he had been recovered. Once when he had been very low for 3 weeks together, and was unable to go abroad, on the very day that they prayed for him, which was on the Friday, he recovered so as to be able to preach to them and administer the sacrament on the Lord's Day following. Another time he had a tumour rose on one of the tonsils of his throat, white and hard like a bone, above the hardness of any scurrilous tumour. He feared a cancer, and applied such remedies by the advice of the physician as were thought fittest, but without alteration, for it remained hard as at first. At the end of a quarter of a year he was under some concern that he had never praised God particularly for any of the deliverances he had formerly afforded him, and thereupon, being speaking of God's confirming our belief of his word by his fulfilling his promises and hearing prayers, as it is published in the second part of his Saints' Rest, he annexed some thankful hints as to his own experiences, and suddenly the tumour vanished, leaving no sign where it had been remaining, though he neither